Our next guest, one of the top economic voices in the U.S. Capitol, he says he wishes the Fed would have acted sooner on rate hikes. Joining us right now is Ohio Senator Rob Portman. He's a member of the Finance Committee. And, Senator, I don't know if you were listening just before, but we had a conversation with Steve Leisman about things he would like to hear from you. And that included what's going on with the Fed. What went wrong? Why weren't they able to raise rates sooner? What do we do about that?
Well, I did hear what Steve said about institutional reform, and I'm not saying that's not helpful. In fact, maybe the terms could be staggered even further away from the political calendar. But, Becky, it's not really about structural reform. It's about just reacting to the obvious situation, which was that a year and 2 months ago, back when the $1.9 trillion stimulus package was put out, people said from the right and the left, and Democrats and Republicans, famously Larry Summers, but also a lot of us said, look, the economy is already performing well coming out of the pandemic. All the indications are it will be back to pre-pandemic levels actually by mid-year. That was a CBO estimate I talked about on this show, and that's the Congressional Budget Office. That was an internal estimate, but also the outside estimates were saying the same thing. This will overheat the economy if you put this kind of stimulus out. So I think it was pretty obvious what was going on, and at that point, it would have been more helpful had the Fed taken action. Having said that, it's easy to be the armchair quarterback
exactly.
in retrospect. So it's, but I think that was the moment. And I don't think it was necessarily in 2020, but in 2021, early 2021, it was obvious we were seeing a big mismatch between demand and supply. And that's when they should have acted, in my view.
Senator Portman, we've made the point repeatedly that the Fed doesn't really have the tools to deal with a supply shortage. Their only thing they can do is smash down demand, and that's pretty painful. It can lead to downturns, recessions, anything else. And I think we're wondering right now how that landing is going to be. What else could be done?
Becky, the one exception I would say to that is that now and again the Fed, just by hortatory language, can make a difference in terms of policy, including on the supply side. And if you listen carefully to what Jay Powell said this week, I think he's turning back to Congress and saying, this is not just about monetary policy. It's also about fiscal policy, energy policy. He didn't use those words explicitly, but it's about policy changes to improve on the supply side. And the situation we're in is caused by a lot of factors, the pandemic, certainly what's happening in Ukraine today. But most of it, I would argue, is because of bad policy decisions. One, the administration way overstimulating with the $1.9 trillion package, the biggest spending bill in the history of the country, chock full of stimulus. Less than half of it had anything to do with the pandemic. And then on the supply side, the regulatory efforts that this administration has undertaken to add regulations, what they have done to the oil and gas business, which is to stifle production. We're 1 million barrels short of where we were pre-pandemic a day right now in America. So we are not reaching our capacity yet. Why? Because the administration gave every signal and specific policies like saying we're not going to produce more on federal lands or federal waters that, stops the investment in the production side. So I think the Fed does have a role there, and I'd be happy to hear, the Fed talk more about the responsibility that Congress has and the administration has on the policy side.
That's interesting. Have you made those thoughts known to anyone at the Fed?
Well, I just did. No, I think it's important that the Fed speak out clearly in terms of monetary policy, as that's their job. But my point is they also have another role they can play, which is to say this is not all about monetary policy. We have limited tools, and that the fiscal policy and, again, energy policy and the approach toward regulations, taxes, stimulus. There's talk now in Congress about another Build Back Better plan that would add more stimulus to the economy. Obviously, that's exactly the wrong way to go right now.
President Biden sent a letter yesterday to the energy companies, a lot of different oil companies, saying that he would like to see them get back into the position of bringing more refining online quickly. Not so easily done. Maybe avoiding some of the bigger problems, policy problems that led to this situation. How effective is that, and what should Washington be doing?
Well, I saw that the oil and gas companies came back with a 10-point plan, and part of that 10-point plan is, hey, loosen the restrictions on developing our energy resources on public lands and in public waters, as an example. So what the companies are saying clearly is, we need to have more certainty in terms of making the investment. And I think it's going to happen. It's going to happen more slowly than anybody would like. That's just the way the market works. But it's no wonder when you have an administration that comes in, day one says we're going to end Keystone XL pipeline after billions of dollars of investments on the private side, and then says, and with regard to permitting, we're going to slow things down, including this Waters of the United States effort. And then with regard to public lands and public waters to say, you know, we're going to have a halt here in terms of new exploration and production. And that sends a very, very strong message, and it was deliberate. It was a sense that we're going to make this transition from fossil fuels to the new, more renewable, greener energy, and we're going to do it right now. But unfortunately, we're not ready to do it right now, and certainly not to do it at a time when, again, we had this increase in demand that everybody was predicting based on the increased stimulus. So I think it was just a bad policy decision that's now affecting middle-class families in my state and around the country. $5 gasoline, 8% inflation on things like food and clothes. So it's really rough on people. It's the most punitive tax of all.
Senator, you've always been someone I think is very reasonable, someone who's willing to work across the aisle, someone who's willing to kind of look at a logical way of moving forward with things. But is there any talk of that sort of logic of people getting together on both sides, kind of saying, here's where we're going to try and fix things to make things better? I just hear a lot of rhetoric right now.
Yeah, I think in this case, it's going to be tough to do anything proactive because we are, in a political year, unfortunately. I do think there's some things that would help right away. One is to make a decision not to move forward with more stimulus spending right now. This is exactly the wrong thing to do. Everybody should realize that. Second is to deregulate wherever possible. Much of that happened because of the administration. It's not a congressional act, but in every sector of the economy, there's growing regulation that needs to be pulled back. And then in terms of where we go going forward with this package that's currently between the House and the Senate being debated, which is called the Competes Bill or USICA, the House and Senate versions of it, that could help. That could actually be counterinflationary if it's done properly, which is to say that it would increase the supply, specifically things like semiconductors, which is a part of that. So there are some things that we can and should do that currently is very much, in the process because you've got Republicans and Democrats trying to work out a compromise. My hope is that the House Democrats are willing to be more flexible because remember we had a bipartisan bill that came out of the Senate that was already negotiated with Senate Democrats and with the White House, and it got 19 Republican votes. We need to stick with that. But that would help somewhat, and it would send the right signal to the markets that America is going to do a better job in terms of worker retraining, in terms of specifically ensuring we have supply chains for some of the high-tech products that are so necessary in our economy today, like semiconductors. So that's one thing that Congress could do, in my view, that would help.
What's the number one complaint you hear from your constituents right now?
Gas prices. I filled up my pickup truck last weekend. I was paying $120, but then I also got an earful from others who were filling up their cars and trucks around me. I mean, this is a killer. People that commute to work, people on fixed incomes, seniors, young people. I mean, I don't know how people can do it because it's taking a huge bite. I had the truckers in yesterday talking about $1,500 to fill up an 18-wheeler, and the independent truckers going out of business because they just can't afford it. They can't pass all that along to their customers. So I think it's fuel prices, one, and second, food. People going to the grocery store and looking at the huge increase in the price of basics, trying to downgrade all they can, but at some point it's just impossible. So I think that's the number one issue I'm hearing about.
You've got economists looking at core inflation. It's everything but core.
Senator, you said, unfortunately,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's an election year. You want to change that?
Well,
just
I'm
giving
glad
you
it's
the
an election year in
opportunity.
some
Just
respects.
giving you the opportunity. I think we're fortunate it's an election year. Just reevaluate it.
We're done.
No.
Yeah.
We
Well,
can
look,
wait.
I think we'll see a change in the House and maybe a change in the Senate, certainly a change in the House, and that'll help. And, Joe, that'll put guardrails on the administration, but it doesn't keep the administration from doing things like the regulatory efforts I talked about earlier that are kind of under the radar and aren't the result of legislation. So it's, the administration's got to look at this inflation issue as an opportunity to deregulate, not to do more stimulus spending, to increase on the supply side, to try to deal with that mismatch between demand and supply. And if they don't do that, we're going to see this high inflation going certainly through November. And I think we're looking at, unfortunately, another quarter of negative economic growth, which technically is going to mean that we're in recession.
Senator, thank you. Squawk Box will be right back.